Everybody. As usual, we have a very full agenda tonight, and we want to start out. Megan Gilliland is here. You may remember Megan from the very beginning of our process. She's the communications director, coordinator for the city, and she's going to talk to us about release of our draft recommendations, how the public feedback will be handled, and related matters. Right? Let's go ahead before she starts and consider approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, which would be the December 2nd meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve. Okay, Bonnie, second?
I second.
Mary Ann seconds, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, Megan, you ready for you?
Good evening. Well, actually, I'm kind of here more to listen to you and ask you, what is it that you want? I understand, I've obviously followed your process through the last several months. And we've done a Lawrence Listens question for you, and you've gotten that information. And so we have a lot of tools available to us to help get this information out. I understand you're at the point where you're ready to release your draft recommendations. Is that correct?
As of the 25th. We're not
Okay.
quite there, but that's the release date that we have scheduled.
Okay. And you'll release those. And obviously, the first things that come to mind are, some sort of a press release, and working with the media to try and generate some news stories and news coverage on it through radio, TV, and print. And then we'll also do social media. And we have some partners out there, the health department, Live Well Lawrence, and those kind of groups that tend to always help us push that information out. So we'll tag them and try and use their connections as well. But what is it that you want people to come back with? Is it an open-ended question? Do you want a survey? I guess I'm trying to understand, what kind of feedback are you seeking from? Do you want them just to say, yeah, this is exactly what we want, or no, this part is not what I want? And do you have some sort of a public meeting scheduled to present that as well?
We have a public meeting scheduled on February 3rd that will be for members of the public to come live and address us live. And I think it's 5:45 to 6:45 on February 3rd. In terms of taking other kinds of feedback, what is usually done with draft reports? What kind of feedback system is provided?
Well, the one that comes to mind is the Solid Waste Task Force. When they came together in 2011, I think it was, we had an email set up, an email where people could email back comments, on a draft recommendation. That also happened to be the same email where they could send comments throughout the whole process to the group, and then Tammy, who was the staff member, collected those and then provided them on. So, that's very easy. Through Lawrence Listens, again, we can do kind of I would say that the first thing we need to do, and I have not seen your report, so I'm talking a little bit blind when I say this, but some sort of, an executive summary of, what are the really big things people should know in the draft recommendations. Maybe take it a little bit piece by piece and help summarize that. And then, maybe we even work on something that's a little bit graphical as well, because sometimes people digest things when they're visual, not so much a big draft report. And so maybe we could do that, and we could use those graphics through social media and things like that kind of help tell a story through an infographic or something like that. If you want to use Lawrence Listens, probably the best way to use that is, again, kind of an open-ended question. Do you have comments on the draft recommendations? Again, that would come through the platform, and then I'd forward all those comments onto you as a CSV file or PDF or however you would like it. Those are kind of my first thoughts on it. But if you have any other recommendations or thoughts, I could certainly kind of take a look into it and see what is doable. Our social media channels have extensively boomed this year. We just did a look, and we had 4.5 million impressions through our social media channels last year. So we have a lot of power in that, and I would say a lot of this I would focus through social media to drive people to the website and drive people to the recommendations.
Do any of the members have questions or comments that you want to address to Megan? I mean, I might have a few, but I want to make sure everybody else.
Just a quick question or kind of refresher on one's listens. Or with that format, we would be limited to just one question, right? I mean, that would just.
You can do it as a survey. You can do as many questions as you want. I mean, you used, if I remember correctly, you did an open-ended, and then did we do a survey too? I can't remember.
No.
Okay. We did like an open-ended question. You can do a survey. There's a lot of different ways that you can use Lawrence Listens, and we have a lot of plans for it this year. But you can say if you had $100, for example, like how much would you put towards sidewalks? How much would you put towards sharrows? How much would you put towards other things? I mean, you can do it as a budgetary type of, question and answer. There's a lot of different survey tools that you can use on that, but you're not limited to a single question. I would say that as you're developing a survey, if you're going to ask multiple questions, maybe chunk it up by recommendation. Again, I'm a little blind on this. I don't know if recommendation 1 is this. Here's recommendation 1. Do you have any thoughts on this? Or here's recommendation 2. Do you have any thoughts on this? And you kind of piece it out like that.
Yeah, I don't have anything real specific in mind, except I'm just thinking, question like, give us feedback on the report might be just too much, and something somewhat structured so that people could respond to somewhat different parts of the recommendations.
Right. And it can be daunting to give somebody a 25-page report and say, give us your information.
Right,
I mean, that's a lot to read and digest, and that's why I would say some sort of an executive summary or an infographic or something that kind of is a fact sheet almost, of what are you presenting in these recommendations. Sometimes that's really helpful, and then you lead them to, you only have so much space to do something like that on a fact sheet, and then you lead them further into the recommendations to kind of give them the breadth of the information that you're trying to understand.
Well, the way the report is structured, after the introduction, and we present some information from the citizen surveys and from our own public input sessions. Then there's 2 main sections. One is findings and one is recommendations. And findings has, I think, 10 different conclusions that we have reached based on everything we learned. And the findings don't suggest the answer, they just state this is what we found. And then the next section in the recommendations is sort of divided in 3 sections. There's some overall recommendations, and then there are some that are specific to the walking environment, and then another set specific to the biking environment.
Just on that alone, I think that a multi-point question with a little bit of information, a multi-part survey or something like that with a little bit of information on each might be helpful and not require people to answer all parts of the survey. Maybe they're only really interested in the bicycle part. I think the other thing that you need to do with public information and release of this is you also want to give people who maybe aren't watching at home regularly or aren't paying attention to this specific topic as regularly, you want to give them some understanding of the amount of work that has gone into this, noting how many surveys were received and all of the public process leading up to it. So it's you also want to educate them very briefly about the fact that you pulled together this group of people, you've worked for this many months, and you've done all these public things to get to this point. And so then you give them a call to action. What is it that you want them to do? You want them to review your survey, you want them to review your recommendations, and then give you feedback. And I always tell people this, that you know, we're all busy and we all have lives, and, you know, this may not be, you know, the highest priority for people, but you want to give them some reason why it matters for them to to give you some sort of feedback. You know, is there money in the budget at stake? Is there, you know, I think I told Jessica this earlier today, is the city of Lawrence going to build 3 miles worth of sidewalks and you want one in your neighborhood? I mean, you kind of want to give them some understanding of why this is important, instead of just a survey or a study or something like that that has been completed. We want to draw them in and engage them to understand what you guys have been doing and the recommendations that are coming out of it. And that would probably, again, I'll sit down and read your recommendations, but it sounds like your recommendations may give me some feedback to go on as to what makes this part of somebody's life, not just a report.
Yeah, I think there are some key things that we're recommending that would be changes in the way the city thinks about and handles things.
Right.
For example, going from a model where sidewalks are homeowner amenities and the responsibility of the homeowner, to more of a model of these are part of our shared transportation system and should be invested in publicly. So, I mean, that's a big shift in thinking. I don't know. I mean, there are a few things like that. There's some budgetary recommendations that are kind of substantial. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Those are exactly things, and that's why I'm really actually appreciative that you have me here and talking about this, because that is the one thing I would want to do as your communications manager, is make sure that I help you manage that message out. Because if our friends in the media got a hold of this, you know, the headline would be XYZ, and I'd really like to help you guys with managing that message through press release and social media, that these are recommendations, some of them are this, and, you know, because they do, and of course your recommendations then have to go to the city commission for implementation.
Right.
Okay.
It sounds like maybe we need to work on some sort of a fact sheet draft and then come to you with it. And
I'd be happy to work with a couple of you or something
Okay.
on it if you wanted. I'd be happy to just be part of that process.
that'd be
So, yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
That'd be great. I'll contact you tomorrow.
Sure, that's fine. We can do that. And then, you know, once we kind of have some of that in place, we can actually develop a communications plan for it, which is, you know, kind of the formula that I use of, are we hitting all the places that we need to hit? Are we using all the tools we need? And then, you know, actually go to timelines and understand when are we rolling this out and how are we getting this out to the people? And what is you're having a meeting on February 3rd, and then when are you wanting information back, public input back?
The comment period is from January 25th to February 5th.
Okay.
And the public meeting itself is February 3rd. So
Okay.
it's kind of toward the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we've got until March 1st to finish and submit our recommendations to the commission. But so we've got some February meetings planned tentatively. We just don't know how much we're going to get from the public and how much we're going to have to
Revise.
rework. Yeah.
The other thing that would be really helpful, and maybe it's with the small group that gets together with the fact sheet, but, you know, I between Nick, my social media person, and myself, we have a pretty good handle on some of those stakeholder groups that we think we should tie into. But if you belong to like a Facebook group or a Twitter group, or you know of a handle that we should make sure that we're attaching ourselves to, that would be really helpful if you could give us that so that we can include it as part of our communication plan. Because sometimes we can follow them as a city entity and sometimes we can't. You know, like I can't join neighborhood groups as City of Lawrence. I have to join this myself, and sometimes that gets a little hard. But if there's specific groups that you think could really be valuable in getting this message out, let us know who they are so we make sure we include them.
Yeah, I mean, there are some segments because there's some pieces that address safe routes to school,
Mhm.
which is going to be of interest to parents.
Mhm.
We have pieces that are of interest to seniors and people with disabilities. Different neighborhood groups. There are pieces of the message that would be of greater interest to certain populations, if you're interested in that kind of thing.
But like I said, if we do kind of take this and parcel it out a little bit, then we can kind of tailor that to those individuals. It may be that they only really want to comment on the part that's about schools,
Right.
but we let them know about all the recommendations, and we give them something that's easy to digest, to help them understand it and understand the overall platform. Okay,
Fantastic.
does that help you?
Yes.
Megan, are you, just step back to the comment about the groups that you can't join as the city. Are you interested in how we, as task force members, can help with the promotion of the message? Like, the health department, I'm sure would help, but Live Well, I'm sure could be one of those. The Pedestrian Coalition could be one. There are several different neighborhoods that have groups that, I don't know who all belongs to them, but
Yeah, I would
I
say
mean,
anything that you
is
can
that something
do
you'd
as a-
want us to provide you a list of, here's what I'm thinking I could do? Or just let
Well,
us,
either that or just as the task force, we'll provide you the communication plan back, we'll provide you the links, we'll provide you the social media or whatever. But, the most important thing and the most helpful thing for me in social media is not when people like something, but when people share something. So if you took it from like the city's Twitter account and you shared it out to your followers or whatever, that is how we get much greater engagement and participation. And then somebody else picks it up and rolls with it. So I would say that, as a task force member, if you took something that we put out and shared it through your social networks, that would be incredibly helpful, because then you make the personal connection that I'm a task force member. This is really important to me. We've been working on this for over a year. Please consider taking a look at this website with these recommendations and going and giving us your feedback. And then that's exactly how social medias are so powerful.
is the city able to boost any posts or do any Facebook advertising to get the
Mhm.
message out to
Yeah,
more
we've done
people?
that on occasion.
And I think it's not too expensive, and
No, it's incredibly affordable and economical to put a little bit of money. And then if you see that it's not getting any traction, you can change and alter the way that you're doing it. But we've done it for a couple other things, and it's I don't have much of a budget, but those kind of things I feel like are important. So
that Live Well video that was put out this weekend, I think it's had 12,000 views, and I boosted it for $20.
mhm,
Didn't take a lot to almost triple the original organic reach. So
yeah, it's
it seems like it's quite a bit for a little bit of money. I'm also curious about the timing of the report going out for the review, but also the kind of next stage where it goes to the commission, and what other part of a communications plan would need to be developed to help kind of, when it goes to that commission decision point, for them to receive it. Are they gonna be aware of it? Are we communicating with them as an audience at that meeting only, or are we just waiting for staff to present it? I mean, what's that piece of the communications, not to the general public, but to the commission?
I would leave that up to your chair to make those decisions. Obviously the city commission's pretty generally aware of most of the stuff that we're putting out. They get all of our press releases and things like that. I would recommend that staff or somebody puts it on like a city manager's report, when we release it around the 25th, just to let the commission know, because Diane highlights those in the public meeting every Tuesday night, what's on the city manager's report. So that would be a good way to let them know that recommendations have been developed and that they're coming their way. And then at the public meeting, I would say your chair would probably need to make those decisions as to how you're going to communicate that to the city commission.
Yeah, Charlie, I have a meeting set up with Diane Stoddard on the 12th of January. And, well, actually, Dave and I will both meet with her, and that's when we'll go over trying to understand exactly, you know, in the lead up to the delivery of the report, then what happens at the meeting when the report is accepted, and then once accepted, what kind of follow-up happens to see how the commissioners will act on the recommendations. So I think I'll have a better idea of that whole process next week.
Are we trying to identify people that might speak in support of the recommendations at that meeting? Is there a plan that we would actually go out with the final document and say, you know, we're done, here it is? And that piece is, like, so far we've talked mostly about let's get feedback on the draft, but once it's finalized, presented to the commission, I'm kind of curious, is there some space between it's final and now we're going to present it 3 or 4 weeks later, that we're trying to educate the community about it?
Those are all really good questions. I don't have answers to them, but I appreciate you bringing them up.
You know, I think this issue, when we did our citizen survey last year, I specifically asked a question in that citizen survey that we hadn't asked before, and which was, how do you like to be communicated with as a resident of the city of Lawrence? And shockingly, the top question, or the top answer, was local media. And so I think that, you know, we have a pretty new Journal World reporter, and you know, I think we could probably get Nikki to sit down with maybe Marilyn and maybe some other people, you know, once the draft recommendations are ready to view, and maybe we could get, you know, like a Sunday story or something, because this is a big topic. And if you go back to the citizen survey, and you look at, you know, what did people say was important, if I remember correctly, number 3 was mobility and transportation, you know, bicycling and pedestrian issues. And so if we take that and in the communications plan, tie it back to some of the results from the citizen survey, and we make the case that this is important, you know, it tends to rise a little bit higher in the media's eye. And so we could talk, you know, lobby them for a story or something like that.
Other questions or comments?
You're mentioning outreach. Is there such a thing as a bicycle commuters group in Lawrence? Specifically? Does anyone know such a thing?
I don't think there is.
There are some bicycle-related groups, not that one in particular, though.
There's
a
clubs.
pedestrian group, and you mentioned it.
I don't think there is.
Oh, well, I think it's worth everybody thinking about what your own groups and contacts are. I know Dee's been active in Run Lawrence, and I think that's a constituency that's interested in these kinds of things, and different ones of you are in different things, I know. And so be thinking about your own personal networks. And in addition to social media and stuff, and we'll get to this in a minute, but I'm willing to come and talk to anybody that will listen. Or you can talk to them yourself. But I think we're going to have to do some face-to-face public presentations and listening sessions to reach out to more people.
And that's that's another outlet. You know, a lot of times your civic organizations and things like that have their calendars booked up pretty far in advance. But, you know, I would say that, you know, like the Central Rotary group that meets at noon, they have a big component of bicycling. And so it might be worth, and I happen to know a few people in that group. So, you know, maybe getting it out to them. I don't know if it needs to be a full-fledged presentation, or maybe we come and have lunch one day at their meeting and just talk about it. You know, I mean, we can do that. We have contacts certainly to almost all of the civic organizations in town, where we could, even if we couldn't come and do like a full-fledged presentation. I know Hank Booth gets up every Monday at the noon at the other Rotary Club, and he gives, you know, the news of the week, and you know, that's a pretty big group with a lot of gatekeepers, in my opinion, that attend that meeting. And so we can do some of that stuff too. Hank really likes to have me come on the radio. Maybe you could go on the radio with me some, you know, morning and talk about that. I have a radio show I do every Tuesday. We could program that in on KLWN. What?
When are you on?
KLWN. 13th.
When are you on?
Oh, 11 o'clock on Tuesdays. So we usually preview the commission meeting and then talk about things that are going on. But, you know, usually, I mean, that's the nice thing about the media market that we have, is we're a small media market, and they're usually looking for something, so we can usually get in there pretty easily. So,
Fantastic.
okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to put
I
my
will
thinking
follow
cap
up
on.
with
I'm going to
you.
start a communications plan for you.
Right.
And I'm glad you had me come tonight, because when I was talking to Jessica about it, I was like, I'm not really sure if I understand your process. So thank you very much.
Well, in the draft report, there's a background report that talks some about the constitution of the task force. We'll probably add a little bit that explains, like you said, we've been meeting since
Mhm.
June and every other week, and we've done this and we've done that, so that
Sure.
there'll be a write-up of what our activities have been.
Has somebody sent me the draft report yet? Jess, did you? I can't remember.
I don't know, but I will forward to you right
Okay.
now.
Is that it?
Yeah, I mean,
This is volume one.
I was like, that's gonna be several nights of reading for me. Okay.
That's the executive summary.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a little work on that for people that are reading it. Okay.
But it
Thank you.
highlights some of the past surveys with some graphics that are kind of easy to follow, so I think
Great.
we've got a good start at some
Yes,
of
that would be
stuff. But I'll
wonderful.
give you a copy.
Okay, yeah, send me it digitally, because I might be able to use some of the graphics and stuff too. So, yeah, be happy to help. I'm glad you guys are kind of getting the light at the end of the tunnel, proverbial tunnel, and it'll be exciting. I do really think that this is an important topic. I mean, people wouldn't have ranked it so high on our citizen survey if it wasn't. And so I think we just need to figure out the best channels to get the most. And you do have to realize that even though we do all this public process, you may not get a lot of feedback, but really, if we feel like we did a really good reach, maybe people don't have feedback to give. They're just happy that the process has happened and happy that there's attention being paid to it too. So we won't hear from everyone, but you know, we'll try. Okay.
terrific.
Yes.
Marilyn made a presentation at Older Women's League earlier today, and people were very interested in hearing about it. That just struck me as an excellent way to go about getting the word out. Small groups here and there, big ones.
Yeah, we had maybe 10 people, and 3 of them had very specific stories about their own experiences with sidewalks or lack of sidewalks, or,
Most people were pretty engaged, and that was
I mean, those are, to me, that would be an interesting way to get media attention, is to get these stories. Because, you know, not everybody knows why this is a problem or an issue.
Well, and what we'll also do, and if you as a task force or public works or somebody, you know, if you have some good visuals for us, those are always really helpful. You know, really horribly cracked sidewalk, or, you know, people riding the bikes in the wrong direction or something like that. Those would be really helpful for us to have as we do our social media and things.
okay.
Because our posts definitely get better engagement. You get something like 60% better engagement if you have a visual with it. So, well,
Yeah, I have some photos from the Complete Streets policy campaign, so they're 2 or maybe 3 years old, but I have some really good walking, biking, people using wheelchairs, people with strollers.
great.
Got it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan.
Sure.
Much appreciated.
Sure. We go home to the 3-year-old now. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, get home. Okay. Next on the agenda is to review our calendar through March 1st, just to make sure that everybody has all the dates in mind and marked on your calendar. After today, the next scheduled meeting is January 20th, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Then on the 25th, we won't meet or anything, but the 25th is the day that the report will be released on the city's website, assuming all goes according to plan. The report will be available for public comment through February 5th. So it's from a Monday, January 25th, to I think it's a Friday, February 5th. On the 3rd of February, we will have a public hearing in this room from 5:45 to 6:45, so note that's a different start time for us. We're going to follow that with a very brief meeting so everybody can get home to watch the KU State basketball game, which starts at 8. Then we've asked you to put 3 further dates on your calendar, February 10th, 17th, and 24th. And my thinking is that we need to see how much public comment we get and how much we think we need to revise based on it. If we want to do a lot of revisions, it's going to take some more time and process. If the revisions are minor, less so. But one way or another, on February 24th or before, we'll have our final meeting. And then we'll have, if there are any, last minute typos or anything, we'll get those corrected. We'll get a clean copy to Megan and others at the city that will be then involved in getting it to the commission. And like I said, I will know better after I meet with Diane the exact process of delivering the report and what the calendar would look like in terms of discussing the recommendations. I think what will probably happen is there'll be a meeting where they'll receive the report, and I may be able to make a short presentation, but I doubt if they're going to make any decisions right then. So there'll have to be some process after that. Anybody want to add anything about that? All right. So that's the calendar. I also wanted to let you know that I have a series of meetings scheduled. Yesterday, Charlie and I met with the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization's Technical Advisory Committee, which is made up of city and county staff and KDOT. Right? And
Federal Highway.
yeah, and we talked with them specifically about the recommendation related to the Transportation Advisory Board, and they gave us probably 40 minutes worth of feedback, and there was discussion about that. So that was a good meeting. Bonnie said I met with the Older Women's League today, which was interesting. There's one woman who actually was notified by the city that she needed to fix her sidewalk, and she actually fixed her sidewalk. A woman who uses a scooter who can't get to the park across the street from her apartment.
It's Babcock to South Park.
And then there was one other person, and I'm not thinking who that is, but it was interesting how many people in that very small group had some story to tell. On the 11th, which is Monday, Charlie and I are going to be at the Bicycle Advisory Committee, so along with Aaron and anybody else here who might be a member of that. On the 12th, I meet with Diane Stoddard. On the 13th, we'll be at the Pedestrian Coalition meeting. And on February 10th, at the Sustainability Advisory Board meeting. I've contacted the coordinator of LAN, the Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods. They already have a January speaker, but she is going to try to get back with me and see. I'm kind of hoping to get on their February meeting. If anybody has any other groups that you would like me, or really any of us, to come and talk with, I think we'd love to know about it. We've got a lot of conversations to have, and when we have those conversations, then we get those interesting stories that then we can relate back to the media and commissioners and stuff. So I think it's really worthwhile. There's some obvious, coordination issues with some groups that are involved in related work, and we got to talk with them about that. off the top of your head, are there any groups that you think are obvious that we should be talking to that I haven't mentioned?
Well, I belong to Run Lawrence, which is a running club, and while we don't, haven't specifically talked about runners, runners are pedestrians too, so there are a lot of them out on the streets. But we have a meeting coming up, and I'll be glad to talk to them. I think I can do that.
And really, I mean, I'm willing to do as little as 5 minutes or as much. But I think sometimes if there's just a face and a name and we say, this report is out or is coming out, please participate, give us your feedback. Even if we can only sort of make an announcement, I think it's worth doing.
Yeah. Well, our meeting is Sunday, the 10th, I believe, at 4:30.
February or January?
No, January. This coming Sunday at 4:30 at the meeting rooms down in the basement of the hospital, conference rooms.
Okay, why don't you email me?
Yeah.
Let me know about that. Any other thoughts on that?
Sierra Club.
Give them that chance.
Sierra?
Well, this isn't particularly obvious, but they were very
They'd be
interested in the town hall and actually gave money to it. So the Jayhawk Audubon Society, a lot of those members at Ulster were involved. And I could talk to them if that's, if they want me to do that.
Please.
Really, we probably should ask this at the VAC on Monday, like who they have connections with. Like,
Yeah.
I think the bike club meets on February 10th, it's a little late, but their board is supposed to meet that day. I'm not sure any other bike clubs, but
Okay, well,
Yeah.
send me emails of anything you're aware of. I'm willing to either reach out or have you reach out. Let's get the word out. All this great work we've been doing.
I'll mention it to environs.
At KU? Thank you. All right.
Started on the K Urban Planning Program.
There are several sustainability groups that KU.
Okay. I can maybe contact Jeff Severin and ask him. Okay. All right, well, let's keep moving. But if you do think of others, you should let me know. Any of you should feel free to talk on behalf of our group, but I'm happy to do it if you would rather. Hey, Chuck. All right. Now we're going to move into looking at the report itself. Dave's going to pass out copies. Carol, are you still with us?
I am.
Okay, we assume that you have a copy in front of you.
I sure do.
Great. So you've all hopefully had a chance to take a look at this. And what you probably noticed is that there have been, we've moved some things around a little bit to try to, I don't know, improve the organization and format. Mary Ann did some really great work with providing some pie charts on the citizen survey data, which I think are really great visuals. So appreciate her help with it. I think there was one on page 10. Page 10, there's a little bit of a problem with the numbers in the pie charts that they need to be moved, but we've made a note of that. Mary Ann also took on the task of summarizing the community input that we got at our public meeting. If you remember, we had stations, and each station had a board where people had done some dot voting, and photographs were taken of all of those boards. And then Mary Ann contacted Sheila Shockey and got all the copies of those photos and used them to provide the summary that appears on, starting on page 11 and then through page 12 and page 13. And I really appreciate her doing that. It was sort of an omission that we really didn't have a summary of that meeting. And then we have the findings section and the recommendations. I don't remember at the last meeting whether we had talked about dividing the recommendations into 3 sections. One section that's overall recommendations for the entire bike ped system. And that really, those recommendations sort of focus on a continuous improvement over time and a framework for that. And then there are separate recommendations for the walking and wheeling environment on one end, the biking on the second, that present some recommendations for projects to be funded sort of in the next 5 years. So that's what the writing committee sort of did with the organization and structure of the report. But kind of before we get into the details, were any comments about the organization and structure?
Megan made the remark about an executive summary. What are your thoughts on that?
We probably need one.
Would it be a separate document, or would it be just the beginning of this?
It would be part of the report. Yeah, I think we should have one, because it's gotten long enough that, you know, there are going to be those people who just want to take a quick look at the executive summary to see if they're really interested in reading further. So yeah. Anything else? All right. Before we just dive in and start going through pages, there are a couple of issues that I want to make sure that we get to tonight. And these are things that we had not talked about to the level of detail that they're presented in writing. The first is funding levels for projects. When I was, working with the bicycling committee, they were talking about wanting to present some project ideas, and I thought it might be good to give the commissioners a few different scenarios for funding levels. So we decided on $250,000 a year and $500,000 a year. That would be for bikes. And then on the PED side, the same amount for PED projects.
Did you just pick those amounts as round numbers? Like as a parametric value?
Pardon?
As a parametric value, just saying that, okay, we're gonna pick a notional value of $250,000 if the commissioners want to find $500,000, or was there some math behind that that got you to those numbers?
To some extent, it was picking out of the air. We know that right now, the city has budgeted $200,000 a year in each of the next 3 years for bicycle and pedestrian improvements, and then there's some traffic calming funds as well. I think we would all be disappointed, at least I would be, if we didn't try to see if we can do better than that.
Okay,
So my thing was, let's look at some amounts that are
somewhat of an increase and a substantial increase from the current level? Is that maybe? what
Yes,
you're-
without being way out.
Yeah, okay, I'm just trying to understand how the numbers.
Yeah. I mean, I know
Not trying
in-
to be contentious.
No, in the past, I know Michael Almond has put forward some proposals for, say, 2 million from going from nothing to that, and those have not been successful. So I think we know that there's an upper limit. These levels are certainly up for discussion.
I like the choice of levels, it seems perfect to me. Bit of an increase and a bigger one.
It could also be helpful to have an option that shows what would be done if we only have the 200,000 a year.
You know,
I'd rather skip that one.
That was kind of where we were struggling so much, is trying to get that base. What we were working on is that base recommendation, saying just status quo, what's projected right now. And, it was deflating, I think, for a lot of the discussion.
They can take it down to that if they want to.
But, we were kind of ready to do that. Everyone then kind of gave let's go this route. And
Yeah, I gave a bit of a mixed message because when the whole process started, I said, tell me what you would do with $100,000 for bikes. After some conversations that I had, I started to think, if we put that in there, it sort of provides an easy out for the commission to just say, oh, well, okay, they're saying that they're proposing this, we're just going to check that one, and then we're done.
Okay.
And so the thinking was, from a strategic perspective, that we might try to go big a little bit more, with the thought that if we are not successful in having them adopt these recommendations, they can always come back to us or looking at our documents and say, well, okay, what would you do with the 100,000?
That makes sense to me. Yeah, because I kind of viewed it as more of like when you look at it, it's such a short list that people will look at it and say, well, that's like not enough. We need to do more than that. But yeah, I think that's a good and the right perspective to think of it. If it were there, that it would be seen as an option.
Yeah, I think you're mentioning something that I struggled with on the PED funding scenario, because in both cases, it's not close to enough. And it's hard to illustrate that unless you have here's what the full package looks like. And then you go, holy cow. 250 versus 500 there wasn't much of a difference. It was just kind of incrementally, you could do maybe a little bit more. And on the bike one, it did have a different feeling where, wow, this will be substantially better for just double the price. So I don't know how to get that message out, though, about the huge deficit around investment in sidewalks, primarily.
Well,
I mean, the repair versus gap, it's like we couldn't even get past the gap to talk about repair. And I know, Marilyn, you've...
Well,
that's
Jessica
kind of
gave us some numbers, and Dave, early on, and if you guys remember that sort of slightly overwhelming conversation for me when they said, okay, we have, I don't know what it was, 6 million, where'd you go? This much in gaps, and to redo this, it'd be another 25 million, or they were just huge numbers. Maybe one of the things that we could do would be at least to note those numbers in this report, to provide this would be this number, to provide this would be that number. We recognize that it's...
To that point, Mike's point, if I was a commissioner, I'd say, what's the 500 get you? Because it doesn't say. If you had those numbers in there and you could say 500,000 will get us 50% of the safe routes to school, or whatever that is, in 5 years, then you've given them something that they can say, oh, well, that's what we can do. And if it's 250,000, it'll take us 20 years to get the safe routes to school stuff done. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's missing.
It is, and it's better on the bicycling side because the bike committee spent many, many hours hashing over projects. I mean, they did an amazing job all around Christmas. So if you were part of that group, kudos. And they have very specific projects listed out, and it's a lot more compelling than just on the PED side. We don't really have that at this point, but I think we need to get there. So that was going to be one of my.
So will the funding scenarios meet the goals or meet the recommendations of the things the bike people wanted, the bike committee wanted?
Well,
It doesn't say that. That's what it doesn't say.
the recommended funding, with the slower progress, funding level does not.
Right, that's what you need to say. That based on this funding level, we can accomplish these recommendations in however long it is. I don't know how long it is.
5 years.
So you haven't talked about what you're looking for from staff yet, but I have on my list to make a map to show where all of these are, so you can have a graphic to show how this connects to all the existing bike facilities.
Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to talk about the 250 versus 500 levels, which it seems like everybody's kind of okay with. Does anybody think that's too little? It would be a huge step for our city to go from where they are to, if we did 500 for bikes and 500
So-
for peds, $1 million. I mean, that's
Oh.
a big step.
And how does that tie back to the one recommendation on sales tax of .1?
Yeah.
Well, that's another thing.
Because if you're asking for more, and then the sales tax is less.
So I will say, I think it is not enough. I mean, we need to probably acknowledge that. It doesn't get to the full estimated cost in the bikeway plan and T2040. And on the pedestrian side, it's just very obvious that we don't even come close to addressing the full problem. So somehow that should be clear that this year, probably that 200,000 is just a down payment, but this is a
Right.
long-term problem.
There are several holes in this report, and that is one of them
Okay.
that we need to correct before the 20th, is to really get the numbers very carefully put together so that it's very clear. What,
Marilyn, what Charlie just said resonated with me is that the T2040 plan is an approved document of the MPO. And if we compare what our current level of funding, projecting that out to 2040, and that will only get 5% of the need or 10% of the need, whatever it is. And then if we go to 500,000 a year for each ped and bike, that gets us to 60% of the plan. I'm making numbers up here, obviously, but I think that's a very useful metric to say we have an approved planning document. Our funding, if we projected the same level of the future, we fall way short. If we substantially increase it and keep it at that substantially increased level, we still might fall short, but we're actually closer there. I think that's a useful metric.
okay.
And I thank Charlie for stating it that way, because that helped me crystallize it in my brain.
Some of those numbers are on the first finding without recognizing that these are vital parts of a safe transportation system, investing in them annually. I'm not sure though, if, like an infographic or something that would really kind of show the gap that could be created, that would really help.
But I think if we compare it to a document that's already been through all the processes and is already approved, and Jessica has blessed it, what higher thing could we get on?
Yeah, it's $13 million is the estimate for T2040, and then the bikeway plan is between 1.8 and 3.1 million. And I don't know if I got that, understood it correctly, Jessica, if that was on top of
The
T2040?
projections of what we anticipate to bring in from 2012 to 2040 being $13 million.
Yeah, there's a table in there that has the recommended number of investments, and it turns into like $400 and some thousand a year.
Yeah, so
And that's
that is not just local funding. Those are, so those tables are built on assumptions of where all the funding that we anticipate we could get, whether it be local funding, whether that be sales tax, whether that be CDBG, whether that be from federal grants like transportation alternatives, whether that be, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. And so there's a lot of assumptions that go into that table. So it's hard to say that you should only base it based on this, because if you up the local contribution, then the assumption the next time when we update this plan is that there could be extra, that pot of money would be bigger.
Right. And I think what's unique about that plan is it has to be fiscally constrained, and that they can't say, here's what we want. It's, here's what current kind of funding levels we can project to be able to do. And so this is really saying, you know, we're probably planning to commit $13 million. So it's a little bit not quite accurate to state it as, you know, current funding isn't adequate. Because that's kind of
But these are
all
still
that
based
can be
on
done.
assumptions that we could get
Yeah.
this funding. So in years where it shows maybe in 2014, we're going to get this big TA grant, and we don't get it, well, then we just had to assume that when we're doing the planning for this long-range process, that every few years we'll hopefully be successful at getting awarded a federal grant, you know, through a KDOT process. So in the end, when we get to 2040, this could look like something completely different.
Well, it would help if the language on here could be refined to reflect kind of the gap in like need. Here's what we
Yeah, because I would say that this
need,
funding
here's
does
the
not
money.
even, that what we would project even as $13 million doesn't accommodate all of the projects in the bike plan between now and 2040.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
That it's, we're saying, here's all of this need, here's all this need, but here's what we're projecting as realistic, and then we program some projects into that.
Are there cost estimates for things that didn't make it in that table that?
Well, bikeway projects are one that aren't, they're not called out specifically. So some projects might be called out specifically and if they're in the very close year bands, but in the further year bands, we don't call out projects by name, by what they are. We just say it's a sum of this amount per year.
Well, the other thing, Jessica's used the phrase assumptions several times. There's money that the city and the county have some control over, and then there's some money they can request, and they don't have control over that. And so you have the Sunflower Foundation grants, you have the CBDGs, you have the federal highway bill funds that fall out of that. We don't know what that fruit of that tree is going to be downstream. And there's things that the local people can control, things that local people can't control. So I think we really ought to focus our verbiage on the things that are under the local officials' control. And then say, oh, by the way, you know, staff members will be looking for these opportunities to get funds from other sources, but that's not a guarantee. And so we need to, you know, if we're going to strap this on, we need to strap it on and not think Santa Claus is coming on Christmas
Mike,
Eve.
I think you make another good point about that too, in the sense that when you're looking at these tables in terms of dedicated funding and calling out specific projects, you're saying these are the recommendations we'd like to specifically work on for bike and ped. But you're also not saying, you know, you still are also saying, I guess, that you want Public Works to continue to integrate bicycle and pedestrian elements into other capital improvement projects, which means the value of what you're looking at in terms of those numbers really is going to be an allocation probably higher than that in most years than what just would be dedicated to projects.
Could you help us with some of those numbers? Because I feel like we're getting to the point where we want the numbers to add up.
Sure, and I think
And we
it's
want
not
to be able to say that, you know, we're making a recommendation about the renewal of the infrastructure sales tax, and if it passes, then we want to make sure those revenue streams are, you know,
Earmark?
part of our narrative. And we're not just talking about 500,000 from here until eternity. I'm really looking at that amount as to get us through to the next few years until that time. So I think we could really use some help, just making sure, you know what I'm saying? That over time, we're showing in this year, and this year, and this year. And then this year, if this gets passed, then there would be this additional amount, or this would be the new amount, or whatever.
On that section, it doesn't really reflect the need for a sidewalk repair, which is, I'm not sure if it fits there because we haven't quite got to that question of whether it should be public or, stay as
Well,
private.
and that was the other, well, it's one of the other issues. And we can go ahead and talk about that now. I also want to talk about the infrastructure sales tax and what level we want to recommend. But as we were working on the sidewalk scenario or pedestrian scenario, it was clear that even $500,000 wouldn't go very far. And early in our deliberations, do you remember how we talked about the sidewalk maintenance policy and how it wasn't really working very well? And we considered whether the community should view sidewalks as part of the public transportation system. And then we had to think about what that would do, or what that would require in terms of funding, and we kind of stopped there. So then when we started putting the pencil to paper on the numbers here, we were just filling sidewalk gaps. We weren't even getting to the question of maintaining existing sidewalks. And we're hung up on that there.
In my previous professional life, where we had infrastructure concerns and how do we recapitalize infrastructure, we often compared what it would take if we, set a certain budget level, and we said, okay, if we have this budget level, in the next 50 years, we could replace every one of these types of infrastructure. And I was in the Air Force, so let's say it was runways. Okay, so in the next 50 years, if we spent this much a year, we could replace every runway. Well, then you go ask an engineer, well, is the expected lifespan of a runway installation is 50 years good, or is that not good enough? I mean, because, they deteriorate, there's bad weather, and airplanes land on them, and things happen. And sometimes when you did that, you got some ridiculous numbers, said, well, at this level, we're only going to replace every once in 1,000 years of this type of infrastructure. So when you had that, somebody said, that's not an acceptable answer to give to the Secretary of the Air Force. We're going to have to come up with a different number. And so that replacement cycle, looking at a really long term, was a useful way to compare different types of infrastructure, and it was a way that people could understand. No, obviously this thing that we're talking about isn't going to last 1,000 years. We're going to have to replace it before then, so we don't have enough money in the budget, and we need to have more every year to make it more like 50 years or pick some number. So that might be a useful paradigm to do, and I don't know what the expected lifespan of a sidewalk, obviously ones that have trees growing under them have a lot less than ones that don't have vegetation problems, but I don't know if the engineering community has a typical number that, sidewalks are good for 50, 80, 100 years. Brick sidewalks are not that long. I think there's kind of an ordinal thing there that everybody says brick sidewalks won't last as long as concrete sidewalks. But I don't know if there's hard numbers.
But is the question that you're asking is who pays when we're talking about repair of the sidewalks and not sidewalk gaps? Is that's the question, right?
Yeah, because given the scenarios that we developed, there's not even enough money to think about who would pay, which really, one way we could do this is we could punt on the question of sidewalk maintenance. I personally would be disappointed if we did that. But if we don't punt, if we say, okay, city, you need to carry this ball, then we have to say this is how
And we have to give a rationale for why you have to step your game up to some whatever level. And what I just suggest is one way you can do it. Someone might have a better way from their experience, but I'll offer that as something for folks to consider.
Marilyn,
Yes?
way back when, we had numbers on how much it would cost to fix gaps, how much it would cost to do repairs, that sort of thing. Why can't we put that under findings?
We could.
Then they would see, they would be able to compare the numbers of what's needed compared to what we're proposing.
I think that would be helpful. A couple of other strategic things that we could do is we could present these amounts, some amounts of money as essentially a down payment, with the idea that over time, the investment level would have to increase. That's another,
Maybe just have a discussion about what is more important, gaps versus repair, one side of the street versus both sides. Because that, I mean, as I was struggling with this, that was kind of what I came up with. I had to figure out how to create a hierarchy where if safe routes was kind of our original first goal, but when Jessica had that memo, it was sort of like, okay, safe routes, if you put both sides of the street, boom, it's 3 million. If you just do the one side, it's 400,000. And it felt like maybe that is the highest priority for the Safe Routes project. And then you go to the next space, like arterials, and say, get it on at least one side. So I took that as the marching order, was let's just get one side of every street that leads to major destinations, which covers like all the arterial roads obviously lead to major destinations, and collectors likely also. So that was kind of my thought, was one side of the street, and then let's move on to whatever else we could pay for. But there was nothing left. So it was like, okay, I guess that's the only priority, is to get a sidewalk on at least one side.
Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't looked at the Safe Routes to School maps for any other school than the one I'm affiliated with. For the one I'm affiliated with, there are a number of routes that extend up to 1 mile or more from school, which is fine for the paradigm of the Safe Routes to School. But if we're talking about who's really going to walk, I think the closer a residence is to the school building, the higher the probability that parents are going to let the kid walk to school. And so I would say if we put a radius cutoff of a half a mile, or pick a number, 1/4 mile, half a mile, 6/10 of a mile, whatever, and say, okay, a Safe Routes within that radius of the school building, yes, that's in the first level. Then, arterial one side next, then whatever. I think the group that you had there is just fine, but I'd say if we need to pare that down some more, I would say pare out some of those more distant Safe Routes ones, because those are less likely to be used just by the parents' natural instincts for safety.
Unless you consider that Safe Routes to School network, if you build it, also kind of constitutes a primary pedestrian network for most neighbors then to access larger things, because with it and arterials, it creates a pretty nice primary network that if you built that out, it provides a lot of connectivity. So maybe it's just a matter of looking at that.
No, it's great. It's a great idea, but what I thought I heard Charlie say, and if I put words in your mouth, Charlie, I apologize. But what I thought I heard you say was, just with those two basic priorities that everybody says, yeah, those are good priorities, we're out of gas, we're out of resource.
But if you start with that, like Carol mentioned, that with the findings that, determine what the priorities are in some sort of order like that, and that this is what it would take to do that. And then, if we're working with 250 and 500,000, then you may have to make some allocation. But I think having that number up front, what the total so that the commissioners could see in order, so that safe routes to school, mile out, what radius, one side of the street, the arterials next, and have that list in order of priorities and what those total costs would be, and then perhaps scenarios then against those priorities.
Aren't there other metrics besides distance, like population density and projected use and connectivity of the map that the urban planners use? Like, the most connected place in Lawrence is probably here at 6th and Mass because there's the most routes already here, and so that's where you also need the most pedestrian routes, et cetera.
Sir, another metric we considered in previous meetings, and I think it's documented in the report, is where people have been injured, where pedestrians and bicyclists have been injured, and we see those as priority locations to provide additional infrastructure.
The dollar
Or
amount,
solutions.
the dollar amount for, and Jessica, if I'm not quite understanding the numbers, help me with this, please. To install a sidewalk on a single side, it's $230,000. So in both funding scenarios, I basically took that 230 was first year out. And then if it's the slower scenario would be just half of that the first year, the second half the next year. So what I'm getting to is if you were to say it's half a mile, but then there's, that would be another way to frame it. And I actually did ask Jessica to kind of how hard it would be for her to give us those numbers. And she created a map to kind of illustrate it. But what could happen then is someone could be out, say, a mile, and they have no sidewalk on either side of the street because they're too far. For, basically $250,000, there's at least a sidewalk on one side. That seems pretty reasonable to me. Like, part of my path to get Bella to Quail Run, there's only one side of the street with a sidewalk. That's fine. That's what I live on a street where we don't have a sidewalk on my property. Right. I'd be happy to have one. My wife wouldn't.
So the point is, Mike, really the cost of providing sidewalk to all the safe routes is not that high. It's only $230,000.
Am I getting that right, Jessica? That's just to get a single
We
track.
looked at the number, is that what you put together? I'm not looking at the same number.
I pulled it from your, there were so many numbers, my head was spinning, so I
Yes.
just went back to this.
Yes.
And I don't fully comprehend the, $461,000 to install sidewalks on both sides, and then the next table has $3 million.
I have a concern
So-
about having sidewalks on one side of the street. I think it encourages jaywalking. If you go back far enough in the transportation plan, sidewalks were supposed to be on two sides of the street. I would hesitate trying to influence our transportation plan so that people with new developments can't get their sidewalks on both sides of the street.
Well, new developments do have it.
Carol, my understanding, and I actually talked to the planning commission at a particular meeting about the streets around Langston Hughes this past summer, and I did some study of the development rules for the city, and the development rules for the city right now say sidewalks have to be on both sides of the street for new developments unless the planning commission grants a variance. And their policy right now is not to grant variances. And David's shaking his head.
Yeah.
I've captured that correctly?
Yeah, there's a few areas where it's
Physically impossible.
Where a subdivision was approved with a plan that was in the previous code where it's one side, but other than that, that's standard, both sides.
So Carol, I think what we're talking about here is, I think we would probably agree that both sides of the street is ideal. What we're trying to talk about here is stretching dollars as far as possible in a remedial plan. And it seems, at least that was Charlie's suggestion, and I agree, that you can handle more streets in a remedial fashion if you do one side than if you do both.
I understand that, the budget is very limited, but if you imagine the street like the recent dilemma on 27th Street, a sidewalk on one side of the street didn't even come close to solving the problem. And 27th Street is a collector street.
Mary Ann?
This comment is kind of related to yours in the way that you work and the way that you kind of deal with things. And so today I was working on a budget for a project, and you know, you always have a list of things that you want to get done, and you have a cost for what each of those costs, and you present it to the client and you say, what do you want to get done on this list? You have 5 million. All of these add up to 25 million. You get to choose, you know, only a few of them. So it kind of makes me wonder if we could have the list of all the costs of all the different, you know, so first, you know, it's one side of sidewalks for, you know.
Schwegler Elementary.
Well, no, I think it would be broad. So it'd be like we have the designated school walking routes, then collectors after that, and have the long list that includes all the different estimates that they've made
we
to
do have that.
show.
So that's what we send
Yeah.
out.
And it's 1.8 million for arterials and collectors, one side of the street, and
Yeah.
then 230 for one side of the street for safe routes.
Right, so we would take that chart and then we would have a column next to it that says, okay, $250,000. If we get this much money a year, these are the things that we're gonna pick out and do. And, you know, the things we can't do are not listed there. And the same for the 500,000. And, you know, since we have a limit in budget, and it sounds like we're saying, well, we think that the gaps are kind of a bigger issue currently than repairing sidewalks.
Well, that was what I wanted to talk about.
So I wonder
Because I've made
if,
that presumption, and I think we need to chat about that.
yeah.
Is that in fact what we're telling commission and staff is the priority? That's, Chuck, that's been your question all along, the gap versus repair. Doesn't seem like we can do it all, so it's, I said, all right, let's just do gap on one side of the street because the dollars add up to 2.5 million, which is the highest funding scenario. And I didn't know what to do with ADA ramps, because those can't be ignored. If you're gonna do the sidewalk, you have to do that. And it wasn't clear to me on the table how much of it had to be committed to ADA ramps, so I just threw out, you know, let's throw down a number, because some of this is gonna, these numbers would be helpful if we could say, if we're doing one side on arterials, collectors, and safe routes, is that, with the ADA ramps, would that be $2.5 million in 5 years? Or are we still not done? But then the other question is, do we not want to do it all and spend money on repair of the current sidewalk? Or do we want to look at certain places where there's not two sides? And I feel like those are sort of the scenarios. And
Well, yeah, and sort of force some
and don't you need that kind of, what's that
prioritizing.
priority, right? That's
Well-
what you're looking for, so.
So I was wondering if the recommendation, this is clearly not ideal, but I wonder if the recommendation can be, you know, once these four types of gaps are filled, then we need to start spending money on repair, but that might happen after this 5-year period. And so it could be a recommendation for continued funding and after 5 years.
The other thing is that depending upon the level of carve-out that we would recommend from the infrastructure sales tax, there could be more than 500,000 a year. Because I think if we recommended 0.1, in 1 year, the projected revenues is 1.66 million. That's a
Now we-
lot.
Now we can do repair. I mean, with that kind of money, you could do repair.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and I think perhaps implicit in what Chuck is saying is that might be a little bit hard to get the
Well-
commissioners to buy off on, but I mean, I'm just saying
Yeah.
theoretically, we could make the argument that for the next, whatever, 4 years, 3-4 years, it's this amount per year, and then we're recommending this carve out of the infrastructure sales tax, and with this, then you could do this additional set of things.
Well, and I think that 1.66 number, if that's indeed the number, you know, we're saying, okay, 500,000 for bike facilities, 500,000 for pedestrian facilities, and $660,000 for maintenance. And then you know, if that knocks the maintenance in a year or two, then you parse that out to the bike facilities and the pedestrian facilities. I think there's two things we need to state when we look at this. There's things that are near term that the commissioners are going to see during their term in office, and then there's things that go out to 2040 and things they aren't going to see in their term of office. And I think we want to get them tell them for those things that go out to 2040, we respectfully suggest you get the community on the right glide path to get there. And right now, we're too low. We're going to crash. Okay, we need to be on the right glide path to reach our goal, and we're not there. And then, but you're going to be in office another 2 or 3 years, next 2 or 3 years. This is what we think how you should play those cards the next 2 or 3 years. Whatever cards are dealt 10 or 20 years from now, who knows?
Right, which is why, I mean, these,
So there's kind of short term and longer term.
all these projections we called scenarios because I'm not really comfortable with us saying this is exactly what it should be and it should only be this and it has to be this. There are too many unknowns. There are possibilities of grant funding, you know, there are just so many unknowns. I think the best thing that we can do is provide, paint a picture of some scenarios. And then when it really comes down to it, if these things are all approved, I imagine there would be some adjustments in some of this, large or small.
Well, and won't it be the case too that after a certain number of years, there will be sidewalks everywhere because the developers are all now required to put them in?
The infill.
No, because
Yeah.
it's the infill, it's the areas of the community that have already been built.
Yes,
That
I
have-
know that, but at some point, I mean, how many years down the road, I don't know.
But those parts that haven't,
They'll have to
already
be
built.
repaired then.
Yeah, but they're not gonna, people aren't gonna go out and just install a sidewalk if they
No,
don't.
I know that, but I'm saying that, but at some point, the city should catch up with all that that's missing.
Right now, the repair
I
is
mean-
the owner.
There's no plan.
Right, I know that, but if we approve, if
Oh,
we
yeah.
suggest a method to do that,
Goes
it
back to
shouldn't
the
go on,
lengths.
shouldn't have to go on indefinitely.
Like how many years, that 600,000?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it's $40-some million in repair.
Just the quicker it'll be done, yeah, the
No,
more money you put
sidewalks
into it,
on-
the quicker it'll
on
finally be done.
Both sides, everywhere.
The 40 million was to put both sidewalks and to do repair?
No,
Or just the,
I think it was just installing sidewalks on both sides of all streets.
that was
This
not
one, the-
1.6 million a year, that's roughly 30 years.
Our numbers are a lot higher than what you guys came up with based on the GIS.
I guess that was our original number, and we think we've come up with a higher number, but the repair was around 6 million.
So if we were taking $660,000 a year.
Just repair.
so the repair is less than the gap.
9 or 10 years,
The
you're
gap is a bigger deal.
You're getting,
Oh, yeah.
the repairs are up to speed.
Yeah.
But doing just the one side of the street, that gap is 2 million.
Well, it never ends. It never ends.
Well, I think what this is all pointing out to me is that we've got some more work to do in taking some of the numbers that Jessica and others have already provided to us and getting them in the report in ways that are easy for folks to get their arms around, understand, and think about. Jessica, you were going to say?
Yeah, I think this, if you want to think about and look at numbers, this for sidewalks particularly is this one which we most recently sent out,
Right.
this summary, kind of describes how it's all put together and what it all means. But yeah, on the third page has this total of different, you were asking about school routes and CDBG. So this breaks it down based on if it's a school route, CDBG or not, arterial collector and residential. And so it gives a pretty
really lowball, just, or not lowball, just a generic cost estimate for residential, because we haven't looked at those specifically. Carol, when she was here, gave arterial and collector estimates that were a little more engineering planning level estimates, and to add those all up to look at, if we're looking at sidewalks on both sides of every street in this community, we're looking at $127.8 million. So, Dee, when you talk about eventually, that's not even maintenance, this is just filling gaps.
So at $1 million a year, it takes you 128 years.
Yes.
Just to
Okay.
put in.
Yeah, yeah, just get it in.
So I think it'd be helpful to, this was where I got really, I mean, you know, we talked and I was still, it was great, you sent me the whole spreadsheet, that was helpful, but I still, in the end, given the deadline I had to just kind of say, all right, let me go back to this. Where, and so I don't know now if this is really the right number, but I was trying to hit the idea that if the highest priority is to put a single sidewalk where there is none on an arterial, collector, and a safe route, then if that can be done at 2.5 million, then let's say that's the priority. And then we're not talking about repair. It's just like, let's just get a single sidewalk.
Well,
And then if we can't, the slower progress scenario is half of that, so then it would be, let's first do the single sidewalk on safe route, and then here's a little bit left over for collector arterials.
I think something between $2 and $3 million is a digestible amount for the commissioners. I mean, I'm not a commissioner, but, you know, if we threw a $128 million thing at them, they just go like, yeah, good luck with that, you know. But 2 or 3 million, I think that, you know, spread over a number of years, like, yeah, okay, that's something we could strap on.
Another option could be, if it's only $2 to $3 million, they could bond that in 1 year.
2 to 3 million.
Is that,
Yeah, well, and I think, you know, where we started out, I think early on, I was trying to identify certain pots of money within the city budget that we could pull this money from, and I sort of moved away from that toward what our job is to present the problem and help the commissioners understand it's a high community priority, and then present some potential funding scenarios, and then City Hall figures out if it's bonded or...
but I think what you need is that the most important thing is to get a single sidewalk on every street that is collector arterial.
I would
safe
say
route.
some of the streets like 6th, 23rd, and Iowa, they need both sides.
Okay, so
You don't have people,
so that is the.
you know, super major arterials.
So then that's, I think that's what we need to have in that discussion.
Because you
Is
may
what would it
walk
cost to do
across 6 lanes of traffic.
arterial? To put 2 sides on arterials, which gets to Carol's comment about
Yeah.
jaywalking. You know, jaywalking isn't as big of a deal on a residential street. It's a problem on a big.
Well, and that's where you get the accidents, on 6th and 23rd, are those people walking across.
All right,
So what does that cost?
what I would like to suggest, given our time constraints,
Arterials and collectors.
They're just
Collectors
arterials.
out.
No, I could have.
I think there needs to be some more work done on this. And I would be looking for volunteers who would be willing to sit down with city staff and try to work out some sort of a way of presenting all this. So that would
And maybe
mean,
not email, because I think it was hard for us to communicate,
Yes,
to be on
yes,
the same
absolutely.
page. with-
Yeah, absolutely, it was hard, yeah.
Yeah.
so we're
I think a lot of
talking,
this is we probably need to have a lot more staff input on knowing what it would cost if we said the number one priority is 2 sidewalks on arterials. If that blows the 2.5, then I'd say let's go back to just a single track.
all
I mean,
right,
I kind of feel like that safe route, because that was kind of the initial thing that you guys presented, Mike, because it's only.
That was one of the recommendations of the prioritization committee, which,
yeah.
you know, the rest of that's in the ash bin of history, but, you know, that
But
was
if
one of
it's
the things
only
we talked about.
$250,000, maybe this is where I gotta be careful, because I'm, you know, in my work, I'm biased, I guess, so.
Well, let's, I would like to move this discussion off into a committee framework because we've got some other things we need to talk about. So, I know some of you have been working terribly hard and you might be feeling a little exhausted, but we have this other task to do. So, who would be willing to volunteer to help out with this?
I'm just gonna just see if you start sweating,
Somebody that likes numbers.
however you want.
Charlie? Committee of one? Anyone else?
I'm willing, except I'm leaving town on Friday, I won't be back until next Friday. I'm retired.
Congratulations, Beth.
Yeah.
So, the timeframe would be after. I mean, I know that, this is all needing to move forward quickly, so there's really nothing I can do until the, 16th.
Well, I mean, I don't think it'd be a problem if Jessica and I worked on this.
Besides the numbers though, Charlie, do you want people to kind of say, besides the numbers, we want to value safe routes to school, arterial,
Yeah.
collector, residential, then besides the numbers, one side, two
Yes.
side, I mean, that seems like something like right now, if you could at least get a general idea about, will help us frame out then the numbers, how does that fit in? Because without that, then we're really just guessing at what
Right.
this group as a whole is thinking about in terms of those level of priorities.
Right, so Jessica, is that something that you can prepare?
Well, I mean, I think you're asking, could we just,
She's
I'm
asking.
asking now, can you
can we
just,
get a, sense of, for the safe routes, piece, is that, we gotta hang on to that? Okay.
I think that's awfully important strategically, because it gives every neighborhood in the community a piece of the action on this plan. I think that's extremely important.
and if you look at the map on the
strategically.
screen, the light blue is what the safe route, proposed routes are. The red is our missing sidewalk along arterials, the orange is along collectors, and the green is where it's missing on both residential streets, but both sides of the street. And then there's more lines not on this particular map, where it would be just missing on one side of particular streets. But this is just the higher level picture. So I think, Marilyn, you're right when you talk about value added for the entire community for safe routes. Just by looking at the
Safe routes, then arterials, both sides, is that kind of what I'm hearing you have to do?
It's just my opinion.
Well, I mean, anybody else have an opinion on that? Is that, that's
So
a
we're
good-
talking about streets like Iowa, 6th Street, 23rd Street. So you're talking about long crossing distances and maybe not as many because you're going to have to go to signal light intersections to have,
And high-speed traffic.
and high-speed traffic.
Okay.
Seems to me that safe routes, one side of the street, and then arterials, both sides,
Okay.
and collectors, one side, and then residential, one side.
Oh, we've already blown the budget then. I think that's enough to,
Yeah.
That'll be,
yeah.
Well, but we could add that, we could show the commission what that would look like.
Yeah, actually, that would be great to
All
summarize
right.
that up.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Good decision. Somewhat related to that is the question of proposing some part of the infrastructure sales tax. When Dave put together a spreadsheet for us on this, he had 3 levels. One was, I think, .25 or .025.
Yeah. 0.05 and 0.1.
Correct.
It's
And what page are you on?
21?
And
When you say .1, you're talking 1/10 of 1%.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
And for purposes of this draft, I took out the .025 because that was not going to get us very far. So I put in both of these, but I think we should decide which one we want to recommend.
What page are you looking
Oh,
at?
on page 23. Oh, wait a second. Sorry, mine might be page different from yours because I'm not looking at
21 on the,
21?
yeah, on the top.
Okay, it's a big number 2 recommendation here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, and I said include .10 in the renewal to fund standalone, and that's a big word. So it's not things that are synchronous with road reconstructions, but that this would be funding that would be for projects for bikes and peds solely.
Well, and I think there needs to be an additional statement in there that say that this is additive to any bicycle facilities or sidewalk facilities that are included in another improvement project. If they're already included in another improvement project, they don't count against this. So like the million for the K10 interchange. No, sorry, we're not gonna count that. You know, if that kind of thing comes up again, no,
Well, but then the issue becomes, and Jessica was just looking over the next 3 years, that 2.8 million for arterials and collectors that you need, you really only need $1 million, because we're gonna do 1.7 million with the road project.
Oh, like 1 million, yeah.
So,
well,
That's what we
so
really need you guys'
if you,
help with this.
if you ask for a 0.1, that's gonna cut basically what we've got for street in half, and we're already spending a large chunk of that on sidewalks and bike facilities too. So essentially, the
Well,
road
if
maintenance.
it's not an addition, if it comes out of the 0.3, unless it's an additional percentage.
Yeah, that was hard to get the 0.3.
Yeah, but if a 0.05 could
Yes.
be something that could be added on, because right now, what will be up was 0.55. So you had 310 sales tax, and then there was 2 transit. And then one of the transit had an additional 0.05, which was
Right.
voted on and approved, so.
But
I
it
know-
wouldn't be half, it'd be a third, right?
Yeah.
If we propose .1, that would be a third of all the
Well,
money.
It'd be a-
But-
Not that you'd be that
but if you
excited
add
about
on-
that either,
If you
but-
add on the additional
That was just on collectors. so,
$1 million
yeah.
on the collectors, it's taking, I mean, assuming that they're not gonna increase it, I mean, we're gonna be stuck with 0.25 for streets. One's gonna come here, and we're already spending 25% of that on bicycles and pedestrian facilities.
Okay, well, that's what we need your help.
So we
We
have
need a
all
ballpark
that information, and we
numbers.
put it all out there. I think it just maybe, we need to have that conversation where we need to say, this needs to be included in here. We already know based on, in 2017 to the end of the sales tax, we're committed this much on capital improvement, roadway capital improvement projects that are just be bike ped elements. But I think you're still saying we want this other money for dedicated
So I was
projects.
I put in the word standalone, and if you looked at the previous recommendation, it was where it kind of got introduced.
If we tie it into road projects, aren't we determining that we'll be in certain sides of town because very little road work is done in the older neighborhood? Retrofitting, how much road work have we done over there?
Yes, that was in recommendation 1, it kind of begins that, includes the word standalone and tries to distinguish that rather than using the word dedicated funding. It's about recognizing that sidewalks and bike facilities are part of a transportation system. They should be funded without being dependent on
It's
the.
the second paragraph of recommendation 1 on page 20 is what you're.
My next question is,
So then the-
why are we including traffic calming projects in number 2? Because traffic calming projects are not necessarily because of bicyclists and pedestrians.
Well, so traffic calming is one of the ways of addressing or developing bike corridors. So I don't know that traffic calming is necessarily not related to bicycles or pedestrians. People that get frustrated by cars go too fast, I mean, in part it might be because they're not feeling safe.
But that's also true for a driver who wants to make a left turn. How about if we change it to pedestrian and related traffic calming projects or something like that?
Yeah, I think that'll be fine.
That'd be fine.
To what? I'm sorry.
Related,
Pedestrian,
just
Well, it
getting.
could be bike related too.
And part of sometimes is it's not either bike or ped related. If it's like a diverter island and you're trying to keep cars off of it, it might be to calm cars, but it impacts bike ped. You just want to be careful about the perception of the language, yeah.
Creates a better environment for bicycles and pedestrians,
Yeah.
although it's not a.
But I think there's recognition that traffic calming has been underfunded, so I think it's fully appropriate to say that that needs to be invested in, and it'd be helpful for staff to consider traffic calming as a strategy to improve pedestrian and biking environments. Just, I think you guys got that, so.
The landmine with traffic calming though is the folks that don't like traffic circles. There's a lot of folks, when they see traffic calming, in their mind that equals traffic circle, and those, oh God, those 2-lane traffic circles, and those are stupid. Now, and I don't believe what I just said, but that's what some people think in this town. And so we need to be careful when we say traffic calming that we distinguish that from necessarily putting in traffic circles at intersections.
I agree, and I would suggest that committee, which I'll be on, Charlie, we'll work on that. So I don't know that we have to resolve it right now.
Yeah.
There's one other item that I know I promised Aaron that we would air a little bit today, and that is the question of the Transportation Advisory Committee.
Marilyn, I would also, I hope we have a little bit of time to spend on the bicycle part of this.
Okay, working on it. If you've read the recommendation on the Transportation Advisory Committee, sort of know that we're talking about, well, it doesn't say in there explicitly, but implied is that there will be a consolidation of the Bike Advisory Committee and the Traffic Safety Commission. Some members of the Bicycle Advisory Committee who serve as county representatives, because it's currently a city-county advisory group, have expressed concern that they're going to lose their voice if we go toward a city transportation advisory committee. And my understanding is a couple of them are pretty unhappy about that. So I wanted to open the floor for any comments about that.
Well, my comment would be, when we say consolidated, we say here consolidated to advise the city commission and staff. And I don't mean to be critical of the team that put this together, because this was hard. But I think that consolidate, there's more than one governmental organization in this community, and the county's one of them, the school board's one of them, the KU and Haskell are another two big ones. And so I'm wondering if the next to last bullet on page 22, where it says service liaison to key community members, community groups, that we kind of expand that idea and say that this thing also, that we negotiate a charter with these other governmental bodies, that they get seats on this thing and that they play. I'd love to see the school board play on this. I'd love to see KU play on this. Good luck, Mike. Okay.
No, but the county doesn't want to get involved in more politics, basically. They don't want, they don't have curbs, they don't have all the bike lanes, they don't have the sidewalk.
Yeah, they don't have this filthy urban problems.
That's the concern. Even Eudora expressed that, no, we'll take care of ourselves. So to try and do something like that and have a countywide board, I don't think it's going to be feasible.
Yeah, I think some of the design review elements that you're expecting this group to be able to do to weigh in on allocating and prioritizing, making recommendations about funding to the city commission is okay with a city commission body that then generates that board. I think the concern with those other areas is they don't really want Lawrence
the regional aspects of what BAC does is not about necessarily making recommendations for how to spend the money in those communities. And so there's a little bit of concern in terms of that's not what I don't know that that's appropriate based on how this has been scoped, but that really the regional voice in terms of, people don't stop biking or running or walking when they get to a city limit. And so how does that impact coordination and planning?
I think we got this discussion a lot in this whole process, and wondered about the possibility of, recognizing that issue. I mean, I was on with BAC when that discussion and when the beginning discussion of bringing in the city and county together on what the BAC was doing at that point. But, like Jessica just said, in terms of advising and commenting on the capital improvement plan and all of that stuff, that's very much, city based. And we wondered about the possibility of looking at a body that could be advisory to the MPO, that could be city and county for, some of those kinds of issues, that maybe would be a place for that and a place for representation from the county in that situation, but that this new entity that we're talking about would be, would be directly to the city. So that way the county doesn't, the county representation doesn't lose their voice. It's just that, that advisory, kind of communication channel changes in that perspective. Because really county representatives making recommendations to the city, that doesn't really make sense either. So, but maybe as the Lawrence Douglas County MPO, that it would make sense.
Well, in certain situations, it would make sense when you're talking about things on the boundary of the city or things that affect both jurisdictions. It would make sense, but, a county person talking about 23rd in Iowa, probably not.
But they're not precluded from, in those situations where it is a boundary, an interest that, from the county that has it, they're not precluded from making that comment to the city, but just as structure for that entity routinely doesn't necessarily make sense.
Aren't the universities represented on the MPO, Haskell and KU?
KU has an ex officio non-voting member seat on the MPO and Haskell does not.
Okay.
So,
All right, so
yes
they-
and no.
Okay.
So when I talked about this BAC meeting, I don't even remember exactly what I kind of suggested, but it feels like with the transportation, sort of a transportation advisory board, I feel like you don't want to shrink, like the bicycle and pedestrian voices, because I think in a lot of ways they feel underrepresented as it is. And so I don't remember what I recommended at the time, but now what I'm thinking is it was something like having a transportation advisory board, because really a transportation advisory board rather than traffic safety commissions sort of thinks about the whole transportation picture, but keeping the BAC. And at the time I don't remember, said, making it a bicycle pedestrian commission like it is now, or keeping the BAC and changing traffic safety to be more holistic, I guess. There was more to it at that time too, but.
Well, one of the major selling points that we were trying to get to was fewer bodies
Yeah.
to deal with. And we would lose that.
But we wouldn't have more.
And that's a good thing.
You wouldn't necessarily lose that if the MPO has to create another committee too then, because you're still having to create, you know what I mean? There's still possibly two outcomes of that.
I think what we were, correct me if I'm wrong, committee, we're all sitting together. You're all a unit. I think the idea was that the bicycle and pedestrian issues need to be discussed all through the processes that the car issues are being discussed. And so the desire was to bring everything together under a more holistic rubric.
I think we use movement, that we're all are into the people movement business and.
There are members of the BAC who are worried that it's going to backfire and go the other way, that the pedestrians and bicyclists are going to lose something in this scenario because this committee will be dominated by car-related topics.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's maybe an unreasonable fear.
And maybe because there's not that strong voice, there's not that feeling that it's something they're really a part of, is it possible that there will be less interest to be a part of it as a bicyclist? Or, well, there is nobody for pedestrians right now, but I don't know. I don't know if that's as likely, but maybe.
I won't say this on Monday, but I really feel like what they're holding on to is their input to the NPO. That's what they really have right now. I mean, they work with Jessica, and I don't see the BAC going to the city commission making recommendations. They're holding on to the Public Works comes to them, to share about the street maintenance plan and other projects. And, I think, that would probably go away. But there's still a place where they could work with the NPO, and I think that, the TAC talked about this. I think that seemed like a reasonable option. And it might actually serve a better purpose. Because if there's a, greater sense of the regional needs for, bikeway planning, maybe that's less of a distraction for Jessica.
Is there some concern that merging these two, BAC goes away and it's the Traffic Safety Commission that's going to rule?
Yeah.
I think this is a new
Yeah.
set of people.
It really, that is.
And it's going to depend on that board
Yeah.
makeup. And it's going to have some
Yeah.
cyclists, it's going to have pedestrian advocates,
Yeah.
and it's going to have some traffic people. And the goal is what's best for the community. It may be a bikeway, it may be a street, it may be the whole completely, but that's what they're going to look at. We get a lot of requests, and David Woolsey said, this 27th Street was the issue, do we need the traffic calming? Now, we ended up doing everything out there, but did we need the traffic calming if we would have had sidewalks on both sides? I mean, some of the issues that can be solved, that when we're putting in traffic calming, could be solved by having sidewalks available on both sides. But if they're not there, then people are crossing in cars. And so I think it's going to be a new board. And it will have people from all those boards, but maybe even people from this group.
Did you guys talk about whether there would be kind of designated representatives of different points of view, or are you really trying to stay away from that?
We try to stay away, but in Davis, they have a sort of a phase where the two previous boards were kind of essentially reconstituted onto the new board. And in 2018, the board drops its size as people are cycling off, so it goes down to 7, but it starts as 9 because it inherits those people. I'm not sure, though, that anyone from BAC and traffic safety, I would hope they would want to apply, but I would imagine that not everyone's going to want to be involved in more work. I mean, this is more work. It's not, I think that's something that, it's going to take more time to understand the issues and to become competent to make decisions. But it's time that will save the commission from having to do all that. I mean, I would hope that these people are really going to start to comprehend the complexity of transportation and recreation, because we kind of always forget, oh yeah, the trails. So it's those other pieces of understanding trails, understanding transit, and how that interacts with people's capacity to walk and bike.
I mean, just devil's advocate, what's to say this doesn't get stacked with people that are just our motorists?
So
and they're just interested in motorists, and we come back to the same
part of
problem we have
part
now.
of it probably, I mean, it's going to heavily rely on staff, not just for the.
This plan they have to follow.
Right?
Well, I mean, staff are going to have to help develop the understanding of the task force. So I think understanding their their role and how it is comprehensive is probably gonna only happen if staff are committed to doing that. People, if the public understands this is where you go for everything that relates to transportation, then perhaps the public holds them accountable. And we talked to Marianne Huckel, I'm sorry, Marianne. Marianne Huckel is the chair of the Public Transit Advisory Committee. And she, it was a long call, about an hour. She wasn't ready to make a decision one way or the other about PTAC, but she was mostly worried about does the advocacy role of the PTAC member, would that disappear if they were kind of a minority interest in a bigger board? And that's reasonable. I think that'd be the same issue with BAC if they felt like there's only, you and I are the only two that know how to even ride a bike. So how do you protect that? I'm not entirely sure, but it clearly is an important matter to think about.
I would just say,
Mary Ann,
the Historic Resources Commission has specific roles. I think
Yeah.
we do that.
And that's what I just pulled up. They have
Mhm.
some members that have to be at large, or have to be a historian, or have to be real estate, or have to be an architect to fill those positions on that board. So when they have a vacancy, they have to recruit for what their document calls for. So it could be.
And I was gonna say, I'm not trying to speak for or against this because I could see it being really good. It was just, it's more of like, these are actually concerns I have, what I mentioned. But it was also that, I'm assuming commissions are, most commissions are anyway appointed by city commission. And so it's, that's also a concern. The BAC, you're not gonna wanna serve on there unless you're a bicyclist. Whereas this, you might just have people that have a very strong idea of where transportation should go or just wanna serve on a committee and they don't necessarily walk or bike for transportation. And so that's just a concern, just something to point out.
so we've had one suggestion of a way to handle it is to have designated spots.
Yeah.
Or at least in your report, you can say it would be recommended that the board makeup consist of,
Even users identified from each
certain, descriptions. You don't have to be so specific. But Charlie brings up a good point about, BAC is advocates for bicycling, the pedestrians are advocates for, and, you got people that are advocates for motorists. That's some of the problems that we face. There's only so much money, and the bicyclists want all the bike lanes, but then there's other bicyclists that want rec paths, and then everybody wants a side, but there's only so much money, and we can't do all of it all the time on every single, residential street and everything. So that's where a board would, we'd bring all the options to the board and
I go back to way back when we started. There was a session that we just kind of aired out our concerns, and I think I had 4 concerns. And one of them was, what is the role of an advocate? Are they supposed to be the member of a committee, or are they just pressuring that committee?
Right.
And it's not clear to me, because I think BAC is primarily advocates that then have a stronger voice because they're on an appointed committee.
Right.
But is that the best interest of the public? Does that serve the commission? The commission, I guess, they're advocates of them for their own interests too, but, you can't hide everyone's advocacy, so they're probably gonna say, I wanna be on this because I am this way, and I can bring voice to that.
Another thing that I read about, in other communities too, the role of the advocacy groups doesn't go away in this scenario, that there's still a very strong reason to have those advocacy groups, and that, that advocacy group working with the transportation board or whatever, that way it becomes a focal point, to be able to, who to go talk to, rather than, there's the bicycle group here and, the different groups. And so, I really feel like, we're not saying, well, this is going to take the place of advocacy. It's a way, it's a more structured way to flow into the city processes and actually have more of a voice with the city commission than what the Bicycle Advisory Committee currently has.
So one thing then using as a way to think about this work is 3 different audiences, the public, staff, and
Commissioners.
commissioners. Thank you. But we really haven't called out and thought through like the advocates. And so, just even in how we talk about this, we probably need to talk about those 4 kind of groups. And I agree that I think this is actually going to strengthen the way that advocates can engage in the process, because it'll be clear where they need to go, who they should try to influence, and if they don't get what they want, when it goes to the commission for some, for the next decision, that's where they go next. But they've just practiced their round of trying to advocate. So I don't know. We just need to be more clear about how this improves conditions for advocates, regardless of if this new board has more power. Because that was the only piece maybe that we talked about that was kind of the promise,
Well, I
If the
think,
new board has a bigger scope and lets you have more influence because you're,
I
the
don't know
board
if
is-
power's the right word, but I think a board like that would have more credibility for the commission.
yeah.
And if they were all on board with a project, that we brought forward and they were on board with, if they were on board with it, I mean, I look at this like, kind of like the planning commission, where this board would hear all the things, we present our CIPs to them, they recommend approval to the commission, and if it's unanimous, it just goes. Only if it's not unanimous,
Lane
then we would have that
reconfiguration.
further discussion. Not that it couldn't be pulled.
No, I mean, I think that's, that's kind of the vision I think we tried to create, but it's not easy to communicate a big change
And like
easily.
Yeah, like the planning commission, when you think of the planning commissioner, you recognize the level of effort that those commissioners
Right.
put into that. I mean, it's not just a once a month meeting or once every other month meeting. And likewise, we've talked about the need for development of the members. So some opportunity for training or some of those kinds of things, to kind of bring everyone along to develop that expertise.
Well, Charlie and I are going to go back to the BAC on Monday, and Aaron will be there as well. And anyone else who wants to come could come. I want to really further listen to their concerns rather than doing a lot of talking. I think it's really important to do some listening and find out.
When is the meeting?
It's Monday at
5 p.m.
5 p.m.
5 to 6:30.
Is it
Parks and Rec.
Parks and Rec.
Conference room.
Yeah. And I think there'll be some additional discussion on this through the process of public comments. So appreciate everybody's discussion tonight. Bonnie wanted to talk a little bit about the bicycling section, so let's take a quick little time to do that, and then let's try to wrap things up. Bonnie?
Okay, as I look at the words here and what our priorities are, to me, it doesn't exactly match what I see when the numbers are put down here. And one of the ways is, which number 1 is complaints of Lawrence Loop. And when I look at the 250 section, Lawrence Loop gets a small part of that. I would argue that the Lawrence Loop is one of the more important parts for seniors and casual bicyclists, and I feel like that's kind of getting shortchanged there. Even though we say in the words that's what we want, I don't see it coming out here in the numbers. Another question I have is I don't understand. I read that the most important part of the loop to finish is Depot to City Hall, but I see that put off for several years. I wonder if there's a reason for that. Does that have to do with other funding available, or why is that?
Charlie, do you want to take a stab at this?
Yeah, let me try.
Well, our last application was for basically the end of Burrow Creek Rail Trail, 11th and Haskell to City Hall. And what we're gonna do is look at the piece. There was a segment in there from the depot here to City Hall, which we don't know exactly what route to go, so we've left that out of the application. We would complete everything but that, but do that in the next round of TA projects. Study it while we design that, and then do it in the next round of grant submittal with KDOT. So that would be a future project. We would do everything but that segment and then do it,
Right.
whether it's 19 or 18.
But here,
know.
Woody Park and Rock Chalk
So-
Park are
but-
both giving precedence over.
I'll give you some other information that might help understand it. So part of it is that, that the work that Public Works needs to do to know exactly where it'll be done hasn't been done yet.
Okay.
It's also that there's a Sunflower Foundation grant that essentially they're just waiting for us to say when we're ready to request it for $110,000. And some money that could also be dedicated to a capital campaign that could be funded to the Community Foundation, for example. And that, they're basically saying they'd like to do it by this year, in June, early as April. So they have funded the Birchland Park Trail, the Alsop River Inside Trail. The next piece that connects to their investment is the Woody Park Trail, which is $250,000, which is a nice half of what they could fund. So it really provides, then the city would be on tap for the other half, because they only fund, they require a 50%, or basically a match.
Another thing that might help, Bonnie, is for you to know that 2016 is not listed on these funding scenarios. And so there is activity related to the loop that's planned for 2016. The reason we did not include 2016 on these scenarios is that budget's sort of already in the books as far as the commissioners are concerned. And they're our primary audience. And so if we're talking to them about, let's do something different, 2017 is the soonest from their perspective that they can change the way they're doing things. There is some plan for what would happen in 2016. We haven't figured out where to put it in this report or if it should be in an appendix. But I think, Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, that part of what you're thinking got lost is this work that's planned for 2016.
As long as we know that it's in there someplace and it's going to happen, I would certainly like to see that be the top priority, however that's funded and however that fits in here. I
So
think that
We're assuming that the TA
area close
grant
to downtown
will
is the
be
most
awarded.
important part.
We're assuming the TA grant's going to be awarded. If that doesn't happen, then that kind of pushes all this back, because those segments are the highest priority. And then you could flip the Rock Chalk Park segment and the Santa Fe Depot. That could be flipped, then we'd have to move some stuff on the top. Actually, it would probably make some of the Bike Boulevard work happen a little faster.
Well, let me ask the staff, would it help if we were to put in there to prioritize determining the right-of-way for that last segment? The depot to City Hall it's a right-of-way problem, is that correct?
Not really. It just depends what the preferred route is. Everyone has different ideas, and so.
Okay, so there's no preferred right-of-way chosen yet, so it's really a design problem? I mean, where's the next step?
Well, what we would do with the design of that project if we got the grant, which this does assume that we got the grant, and it also assumes that the $200,000 in next year's budget is the match for that project.
Yeah.
So,
provided funds are available.
Yeah, so we would study that, the preferred route, while we do the design plans for that project, know what it is, go through public comment meetings, come up with an estimate, all that money would be come out of the 16 allocation, and then we know where that segment is, then the next round of of projects, or it could, if we have dedicated funds, it could be sooner than
Yeah.
19, then we do
Well,
that.
Well, what I'm trying to get at, would it be helpful if this group in this report were to put a prioritization statement for whatever needs to be done on that last segment of the loop? You just described it in some way, but you said some of that's already in 16, and we're not talking about 16. What needs to be done in 17 to make it happen? If we put a prioritization statement, would that help you?
No, I think we know that it's a priority to
Okay.
because
All right.
it's the route it's really the highest everyone knows it's kind of the highest priority, and it's
It's the hardest.
So when,
it's the hardest.
It's a difficult thing.
That's
I
why
mean,
we've left it
Well,
off.
Right away utilities
We
and
know
way.
that.
I'll talk to you offline after.
assuming that things work out with TA grant, how soon could the Santa Fe Depot piece be done?
It could be done 2017.
Okay, so,
And it's very likely that that KDOT grant project, if we get the money, which we will probably know April, May, it's very likely that project gets constructed in 2017. 'Cause we may start by the end of 16, but to go through the design and all that. So we have it in the budget for 16, but construction-wise, so it could be something that could get done concurrent. We could do that whole segment.
so really having
Fund
that,
it separately, that piece separately from the KDOT and knock it out in one project.
so maybe one way to think about this, Bonnie, is this whole package the right package? And then we can move around when things happen. I think, if it's possible to get the depot piece finished 2017, we can move it around.
Okay, one other thing I wanted to mention. As you all know, South Mass is a high priority for me. And I see that 5 years away, and I'm wondering if some parts of that couldn't be done sooner. I've heard previously that, we could do this minimal part, this would cost this much, we could do the whole works and that,
Yeah.
and put it off 5 years
So-
and it would cost this much. I'd like to see people
Here-
be able to use their wheelchair to get down Mass right now,
Here's what,
not 5 years from now.
here's what we were given is $175,000 can put this standard bike lane on now. Or we can wait until the road is milled and overlaid. And it won't cost anything to do that same thing. So the committee talked about it and we decided that it was best to wait. And in that
What about
period
the
of time,
sidewalk part?
this doesn't address sidewalks, this is the bike plan.
Oh,
So we didn't install new sidewalks, repair sidewalks.
This is where it gets really tough, because we all have our sort of pet projects, and we all want them done yesterday. But when it really comes down to having a very limited amount of money, and then somebody says, well, if you wait 3 years, it's going to be free.
And notice that we
In
didn't,
the scheme of things, it makes some sense to wait.
we actually, and I didn't tell you this, David, we kind of kept pushing back on, that this can't have anything other than just a buffer as protection. So I took, after putting all this in, there was some money left, and I said, let's just say somehow in 2020, when there's more knowledge about how to do protected bikeways, there's gonna be $343,000 to work on protecting some pieces of that South Mass bikeway. But that wasn't your number, that was just me taking the leftover and saying, let's do it, other than just saying, let's do it for zero, because, I don't know, I mean, it may be totally not even appropriate. So if you're ready to say, take it out,
Well, yeah, I don't know about the number. I mean, if you're saying protected as far as putting a barrier in, that's possible, but to have a buffered bike lane, like a protected, we wouldn't recommend putting physical barriers in just because of maintenance reasons. I mean, because you get.
well, I think
the
that's what we're
snowfall.
hoping, and by 2020, there's greater understanding of how to do that kind of work. And to provide something other than just a wide white stripe.
Yeah.
And, it's still a few years away. I mean, there's a lot of cities doing this. Who knows? And is it really a barrier to put up those, even just the, white poles that, yes, get dirty and, I don't know. So we just kind of punted on this one, said, let's what happened during the redesign of that, or the, the maintenance of that street, and put some money there with the hope that there'll be enough public support to make it a different, better project by then, so. That's kind of the thinking.
Keep in mind also,
This
once
is
again,
where-
I'm going to say once again, these are scenarios. I don't see these exact, this is going to happen in this year as sort of binding things that we're going to require the commission, even if we could, which we can't, to accept that this is exactly the map. What we're trying to do is give them a sense of the scale of projects that could be done and how they could be phased in over a period of time. When the new transportation committee, if that happens, gets in, there could be a whole different way of viewing this, and suddenly there could be a groundswell of support for making Massachusetts Street the next project. I think that's really quite possible. So it's important to remember the purpose of this is to justify the commissioners increasing the amount of money allocated to this type of work.
So then to get to the recommended scenario, the reason why there isn't much on the loop, it's in part because the safety of the people where the crashes are happening right now. It's on 23rd Street, it's on 6th Street, it's on Mass. So that felt like perhaps the thing that needs to be improved. And that improvement is primarily to upgrade the sidewalk on the north side of 6th Street so that people can actually get, without having to use the road, they can use the sidewalk with a bike to get all the way across town. And then they're going to be directed to 5th Street where there's much less traffic and it's already a designated bike route. And so that bike boulevard idea was kind of I think there was more interest in that among the committee. It was seen as a way to improve safety for everyone. And then 21st Street was the parallel route to get people off 23rd. And that bike boulevard, it needs to be really clear to people. That's where they should be riding, not on 23rd. So, and then Mass Street was the other one of those areas where we thought improving the safety, but it doesn't get called out as clearly in the recommended, in the bike and the slower recommendations because it's assuming basically the mill and overlay will do it in 2020. So there's no additional investment like the protected bikeway.
In the slower option, is it just assuming the Lawrence Loop to be completed via Parks and Rec somehow?
No, it's assuming that they're not going to get it. I mean, I think part of this is saying if you want that, then we probably need to spend some money.
But we put as priority number 1, complete the Lawrence Loop.
So how
I
much
don't
of
Well,
see
let
it
me-
that is
reflected
not
here.
included in this, in the phase in the funding with the 500,000 a year with these 5 projects? What piece is still left off?
Quite a bit. So everything on the north side that's kind of in the undeveloped area, if you go,
Park to
Well, this is about Peterson to Queens because the
11 o'clock,
yeah,
12 o'clock.
because the Rock Chalk Park segment gets to the piece that they're doing now, which gets kind of to Queens. So basically Queens to
Yep.
Peterson,
actually,
or not to Peter, yeah, to McDonald.
Did I not bring it in here? I have the map of the dollars on there.
I'd like to suggest that, unless this is something that we need to resolve right away, that there be some further side conversations on this with a revision brought back to us at our next meeting. We're already 20 minutes over time, and I don't, this could be a lengthy conversation. So I'd like to suggest that, if that's okay. What we did not do at all tonight was to sort of go through the report piece by piece so that you would have an opportunity to comment on anything you wanted to comment on. What I would suggest is if you have specific comments or corrections, that you email them to me. In the last round, three folks used, what do they call that in Word? Track changes to suggest insertions or changes or deletions. That's one way to do it if you want to. Another way to do it is to just send me an email and say, I think this needs to be changed in this way. It's very helpful if you want to do something different, if you provide some suggested language. How would you write it if you added that in? And we'll try to take that into consideration as much as we can. Are there any final general comments?
I might just say, you know, I'm a little disappointed too in that some of these things that I hoped would happen sooner, you know, look 2 and 3 years down the road, but then I think, geez, the years go by so fast.
Yeah, you've been doing this for a year.
Right. That I'm willing to wait, you know, it's still a small, even if it's a small step in the right direction.
I'm still waiting for somebody to say something good.
I think it's a big step in the right direction, is
Yeah.
what I think.
Yeah.
Are we making progress on this report? Are we getting it whipped into shape?
I'm very pleased with the report overall.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Specific concerns, but overall,
Huge progress.
You and Charlie did kind of an incredible amount of
Yes.
revisions and work on it. And so it's much appreciated.
You helped as well. One thing I'll say about this group is y'all are hard workers. I mean, we've done a lot of work, a lot of work. We're not quite finished, but I feel like once we get a draft out to the public, then we're going to be on the home stretch.
Oh, no. I just think then it could all get interesting.
That's my concern.
It will. We can
It depends
plan
on
on
how many-
it. And we can plan on it, but we can also decide what to accept and what,
Well, we've had a long
Not to
process
accept.
of calibrating ourselves to reality, and I think that is tough to do. And, you know, if you haven't been tracking it, you'll probably walk in and go, what, that's all you did? And, you know, we gotta be ready for that.
most definitely. All right. If no further comment, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair, I
I second that.
Motion by Mike, seconded by Charlie. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you. Bye.
Is it in the